The rattlesnake's fangs sank into Sarah Zimmerman's ankle. So fast, she barely saw the diamond pattern of scales before white-hot agony shot through her leg like liquid fire. The wooden bucket tumbled from her hands, precious water splashing across the dry California earth as she crumpled beside the creek bed, gasping, her vision already starting to blur at the edges. It was June 1884, and the merciless sun beat down on Keeler like a hammer on an anvil, the kind of heat that made even breathing feel like work. She had only walked the quarter-mile from her family's small homestead to fetch water, the same path she had taken every morning since they had arrived in this unforgiving corner of Inyo County 3 months ago. And now she was going to die alone by a creek that was barely more than a trickle. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the burning wound, 2 perfect puncture marks already swelling purple against her pale skin. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled immediately, sending her back to her knees in the dust. Panic clawed at her throat. Her father was in town selling what little they had managed to grow in this desert soil. Her mother had died on the journey west, buried somewhere along the trail in Nevada. There was no one to hear her scream, but she screamed anyway. The sound tore from her lungs, raw and desperate, echoing across the barren landscape where scrub brush and Joshua trees stood like silent witnesses to her terror. She screamed until her throat burned, until black spots danced across her vision, until she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. Harrison Easton pulled his horse to a sharp stop, dust billowing around them as he took in the scene with eyes that had seen too much death in his 26 years. The girl could not have been more than 20, blonde hair escaping from her bun, face pale as bleached bone except for 2 spots of feverish color high on her cheeks. He saw the bucket, the spilled water, and the way she clutched her ankle, and he knew immediately what had happened. He was off his horse before it had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to her side. "Rattler," she nodded, teeth chattering despite the heat. "I did not see it. Please, I do not want to die." Harrison had been a cowboy for 10 years, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana and back again. And he had seen men die from snake bites more times than he cared to count. But something about this girl's blue eyes, wide with fear and pain but also fierce with the will to survive, made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the urgency of the situation. "You are not going to die," he said firmly, already pulling his knife from his belt. "Not today, not like this. What is your name, Sarah?" she whispered. "Sarah Zimmerman. I am Harrison Easton, and I am going to get you to town. Doc Miller will fix you up right." He did not tell her that Keeler was 5 miles away, or that she probably did not have much time before the venom spread too far. Instead, he cut a strip from his shirt and tied it tight around her calf, just above the bite, hoping to slow the poison's journey toward her heart. She whimpered but did not cry out, biting her lips so hard he saw blood. Strong, he thought. Stronger than she looked. "This is going to hurt," he warned, and then he was lifting her, cradling her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and determination wrapped in a faded calico dress that had seen better days. "Your horse," she managed to say. "My horse is not what you need right now. Walking fast will keep your blood from pumping the venom through too quick, and I can move faster on foot carrying you than you could ride while that poison works through you." It was not entirely true, but his horse was already spooked by the smell of snake and fear, dancing sideways and pulling at the reins. He could not risk the animal bolting with Sarah on its back. "Hold on to me." She wrapped her arms around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder, and he could feel her whole body trembling. Harrison adjusted his grip, settling her weight more securely, then turned and started walking toward Keeler with long, determined strides. His horse, after a moment's consideration, followed behind them, reins dragging in the dust. The first mile was the hardest. Sarah's breathing grew ragged and labored, her skin hot against his neck where her forehead rested. She tried to stay conscious, tried to stay quiet, but small sounds of pain escaped her lips with every step he took. Harrison's shoulders already ached, his back protesting the weight, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. He had carried wounded men off battlefields during his brief stint as a cavalry scout before the Indian Wars ended, had hauled injured cattle hands back to camp after stampedes. He could do this. "Talk to me," he said, partly to keep her conscious and partly to distract himself from the burning in his muscles. "Tell me about your family." "Father," she gasped. "Just father now. Mother died coming here, cholera. I am sorry." He meant it. He had lost his own mother to fever when he was 12, his father to a bullet 2 years later. Some sorrows you carried forever. "We came for mining work. Father heard there were jobs at the silver mines near Cerro Gordo, but when we got here, the boom was already over. Nothing left but dust and broken dreams." She laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a cough. "Story of our lives. Where is your father now?" "Town. Trying to sell vegetables. We have a small plot, but nothing wants to grow in this God-forsaken place." Her voice was getting weaker, words slurring together. "Why does anyone live here?" "Stubborn hope, mostly," Harrison said. He could see Keeler in the distance now, a collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat haze like a mirage. "Same reason people go anywhere. Looking for something better than what they left behind." "What are you looking for?" The question surprised him. Most people did not ask cowboys much of anything beyond whether they wanted whiskey or cards. "I do not know any more," he admitted. "Used to be looking for adventure, I suppose. Then work. Now maybe just peace." She did not respond, and alarm shot through him. "Sarah, stay with me now." "Still here," she murmured, but her arms had gone slack around his neck. He shifted her weight, adjusting his grip, and forced his tired legs to move faster. 2 miles down, 3 to go. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat pouring down his face, soaking his shirt. His back screamed in protest, but he ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of his steps, the weight in his arms, the desperate need to get this girl to safety. Time became strange, measured only in footfalls and labored breaths. Harrison's world narrowed to the feel of Sarah's body against his, the faint flutter of her pulse where his hand pressed against her ribs, the town growing incrementally closer with each agonizing step. His horse plodded behind them, loyal despite its earlier fear, following them across the barren landscape. Somewhere during the 3rd mile, Sarah started talking again, her words rambling and confused as fever took hold. She talked about Nebraska, where she had grown up, about corn growing tall and green under summer rain. She talked about a boy she had almost married before her father got the wandering urge and dragged them west. She talked about her mother's piano, sold to pay for supplies, and how she missed music more than almost anything. Harrison listened to every word, responding when he could, his voice low and steady, an anchor to keep her tethered to consciousness. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the first time he had helped drive cattle north and thought he had found his calling. He told her things he had never told anyone, secrets spilling out in the heat and desperation of the moment, as if confessing to a priest instead of a dying girl. Except she was not going to die. He would not let her. The 4th mile brought cramps to his arms and legs, muscles seizing with exhaustion. Harrison had to stop twice to rest, leaning against a Joshua tree while he caught his breath, but he never put Sarah down. If he set her down, he was not sure he would have the strength to pick her up again. Instead, he held her close, feeling her shallow breathing against his chest, willing his own strength into her body through sheer force of determination. "You are stubborn," she whispered during one of these stops. "So I have been told. Why are you doing this? You do not know me." The question made him pause. Why was he doing this? He had seen plenty of suffering in his life, had ridden past people in need more times than he could count, because getting involved usually meant trouble. But something about Sarah, about the fierce way she had been clutching that bucket when he first saw her, about the strength in her eyes even as fear threatened to overwhelm her, had reached past all his carefully constructed walls. "Because you are not dying today," he said simply. "Not on my watch." She might have smiled. He could not be sure. Then she was unconscious again, her body going limp in his arms, and he was moving, pushing past exhaustion, past pain, past the screaming protests of his body. The town was close now, so close he could make out individual buildings, see people moving in the streets. "Help!" he shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "Need a doctor, snakebite." Faces turned toward him, figures beginning to run in his direction, but Harrison did not wait. He stumbled forward, legs threatening to give out with each step, Sarah a precious burden in his aching arms. His vision tunneled, everything except the path ahead fading into insignificance. Keep moving. Keep her safe. Nothing else mattered. A man in a dark suit appeared in front of him, medical bag in hand, weathered face creased with concern. "The doctor's office is just ahead. Can you make it?" Harrison nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed the man's pointing finger toward a building with a hand-painted sign reading Miller Medical. The last 100 yards felt longer than the entire 5 miles before them. His legs shook, muscles turned to water, but somehow he kept moving, kept Sarah secure against his chest, until he was stumbling through the doctor's door and laying her as gently as his trembling arms would allow on the examination table. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, every muscle in his body screaming. Someone pressed a cup of water into his hands and he drank greedily, barely tasting it, his eyes never leaving Sarah's pale face. Dr. Miller was already working, cutting away the makeshift tourniquet, examining the wound, calling for supplies in a calm, practiced voice. He was older than Harrison had expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and steady hands that moved with the confidence of decades of experience. "You did good work with this tourniquet," the doctor said without looking up. "Probably saved her life by slowing the venom. How long ago was she bit?" Harrison tried to remember, but time had become meaningless somewhere during that brutal walk. "Hour, maybe." "I found her by Miller Creek, carried her straight here." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "You carried her 5 miles. Did not have much choice. Most men would not have bothered." Miller was preparing a syringe now, drawing clear liquid from a small vial. "Lucky for her you are not most men. This is antivenin. New medicine. Been using it about 2 years now with good results. Still, next few hours will tell the tale." He injected the medicine near the bite site, then began cleaning the wound with sharp-smelling antiseptic. Sarah moaned but did not wake, her face waxen in the lamplight. Harrison watched every movement, his heart hammering against his ribs, fear and exhaustion and something else he could not quite name churning in his gut. A new voice spoke from the doorway, rough with worry. "Is that Sarah? God in heaven, what happened?" Harrison turned to see an older man, maybe 50, with weathered skin and desperate eyes. Sarah's father, he guessed, recognizing the same determined jaw, the same fierce will to survive written in every line of his face. "Rattlesnake got her while she was fetching water," Harrison explained, hauling himself to his feet on shaking legs. I brought her in as fast as I could." Samuel Zimmerman crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking his daughter's limp hand in his own calloused one. "Sarah, honey, can you hear me?" She did not respond, lost in fever dreams, and her father's face crumpled. "She is all I have left. Since her mother died, she is all I have." "The medicine is good," Dr. Miller said, his voice gentle but firm. "She is young and strong. Those are advantages. But I will not lie to you, Samuel. It could go either way. Best thing we can do now is keep her cool, keep her still, and wait. Wait." Harrison hated waiting, hated the helplessness of it, but there was nothing else to be done. He sank into a chair against the wall, his body finally getting the rest it had been screaming for, though his mind remained fixed on the girl lying so still on the examination table. Samuel pulled up another chair beside his daughter, never releasing her hand, murmuring soft words Harrison could not quite hear. Private words, father to daughter, full of love and fear and hope. Hours crawled by. The sun moved across the sky, light shifting through the windows, painting moving shadows on the walls. Harrison dozed in fits and starts, jolting awake every time Sarah made a sound, every time the doctor checked her vital signs. Samuel never moved from his daughter's side, keeping vigil with the desperate focus of a man who had already lost too much. As evening approached, Sarah's fever began to break. Color returned to her cheeks, her breathing grew easier, more regular. Dr. Miller smiled for the first time, checking the wound and nodding with satisfaction. "She is going to make it," he announced. "The antivenin worked. Another day or two of rest and she will be weak but recovering." Samuel Zimmerman wept, dropping his head onto his daughter's hand, his shoulders shaking with relief. Harrison felt his own throat tighten, unexpected emotion welling up inside him. He had seen death so many times that saving a life felt almost miraculous, a small victory against the cruelty of the world. Sarah's eyes fluttered open just as full darkness fell outside. She looked confused at first, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the lamp burning low on the desk, her father's tear-stained face. Then her gaze found Harrison, still sitting against the wall, and recognition sparked in her blue eyes. "You carried me," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "All the way," her father confirmed, lifting his head and wiping his eyes. 5 miles on his back. Doctor says he saved your life." Sarah continued staring at Harrison, something shifting in her expression that he could not quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, more complex. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt inadequate, both of them knew it, but Harrison nodded anyway. "Rest now, you need to heal." But she did not look away, and neither did he, and in that moment something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. A connection forged in desperation and pain, in the intimate knowledge of another's vulnerability, in the terrible and beautiful act of one person refusing to let another die. Dr. Miller cleared his throat. "She needs to stay here tonight so I can monitor her condition." "Samuel, you should go home, get some rest yourself. You look like you are about to fall over." Samuel shook his head stubbornly. "I am not leaving her. Then sleep in that chair, but sleep. That is an order." The doctor turned to Harrison. "You too, young man, when was the last time you ate?" Harrison tried to remember and could not. Breakfast, maybe? That felt like days ago. His stomach growled in response, suddenly making its needs known now that the crisis had passed. "There is a boarding house 2 doors down," Miller continued. "Mrs. Chen serves a good meal and keeps clean rooms. You should get yourself sorted out." But the thought of leaving, of walking away even for a few hours, felt wrong somehow. Harrison's eyes drifted back to Sarah, finding her still watching him with that same intense gaze. "Go," she said softly. "I will still be here in the morning." It was the promise in those words, the implied "we will see each other again," that finally got him moving. He stood, wincing as abused muscles protested, and nodded to the doctor, to Samuel, and finally to Sarah. Tomorrow, then. The boarding house was exactly 2 doors down, just as Dr. Miller had said. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner who took one look at Harrison and immediately started fussing over him in a language he did not understand but whose meaning was perfectly clear. Within minutes, he was seated at a table with a plate of food in front of him, some kind of rice and vegetables, and meat that tasted better than anything he had eaten in months. Other boarders gave him curious looks, and he heard whispered speculation about the cowboy who had carried the Zimmerman girl all the way from Miller Creek. News traveled fast in small towns, especially dramatic news. Harrison ignored the stares and focused on eating, on replenishing his depleted body, though his mind remained back in the doctor's office with a blue-eyed girl who had looked at him like he was something more than just another drifter passing through. He rented a room for the night, the first real bed he had slept in for weeks, having spent most of his time lately camping under stars between odd jobs. But despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him for a long time. His arms still remembered the weight of Sarah's body, his legs still felt the burn of those 5 endless miles, and his mind kept circling back to the moment their eyes had met in the doctor's office, to the strange feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his world. Morning found him stiff and sore but awake before dawn, unable to stay away any longer. He cleaned up as best he could, wishing he had a change of clothes, and made his way back to the doctor's office as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Sarah was awake, propped up on pillows, looking tired but infinitely better than the day before. Her father dozed in the chair beside her, head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle, soft snores filling the quiet room. Sarah's face lit up when Harrison entered, and that strange feeling in his chest intensified, like something long dormant coming back to life. "Good morning," she said quietly, not wanting to wake her father. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I was bitten by a snake and carried 5 miles. She smiled, taking the sting from the words. "Weak as a kitten but alive, thanks to you." Harrison pulled up another chair, sitting down with a grunt as sore muscles complained. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said firmly, "they would not have. Most people would have put me on a horse and hoped for the best, or just left me there to die alone. You destroyed your back carrying me because you thought it would give me a better chance. That is not anyone. That is you." He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just sat with her in the comfortable silence of early morning while her father snored, and the town began to wake outside the windows. Dr. Miller arrived shortly after, looking pleased with Sarah's progress. "Another day or 2 of rest and I will release you to go home, but you need to take it easy for at least a week. That leg is going to be sore and you will tire easily while your body fights off the last of the venom." "Can she have visitors?" Harrison asked before he could stop himself. The doctor's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I think that would be fine as long as they do not tire her out too much." So Harrison visited. He came in the morning with fresh flowers he had bought from the general store, wildflowers that looked half dead but were the best Keeler had to offer. He came in the afternoon with books borrowed from Mrs. Chen, reading aloud to Sarah when her eyes grew too tired to read herself. He came in the evening with stories from his years on the trail, carefully editing out the worst parts, focusing on the beauty of cattle country in spring, the camaraderie of trail crews, the satisfaction of honest work under open skies. Samuel Zimmerman watched these visits with sharp eyes, assessing Harrison the way a father assessed any man who showed interest in his daughter. But whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because on the second day, he pulled Harrison aside and shook his hand with real warmth. "I have been asking around about you," Samuel admitted. "People say you are a good man, honest, hard-working when you can find work. They say you do not drink to excess or gamble away your pay or start fights. That is rare enough in this country." Harrison shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "I just try to live decent." "Well, you saved my daughter's life, and I will not forget that. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you come to me. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." But what Harrison needed was something Samuel could not give him. He needed more time with Sarah, needed to understand this pull he felt toward her, this sense that his wandering days might be coming to an end if only he was brave enough to stop running. On the third day, Dr. Miller declared Sarah well enough to go home, though he warned again about taking things easy. Harrison helped her to her feet, letting her lean on him when her injured leg protested. She wore the same faded calico dress from the day he found her, cleaned and mended by Mrs. Chen, and somehow she made it look like the finest silk. Samuel had borrowed a wagon to take her home, but the short walk from the doctor's office to the street seemed to exhaust Sarah. Her face paled, breath coming short, and Harrison swept her up in his arms again without thinking, carrying her to the wagon as naturally as breathing. "I can walk," she protested, but her arms went around his neck anyway, holding on. "I know," he said, "but why should you when I am here?" He set her gently in the wagon bed, on blankets Samuel had arranged to make the ride more comfortable. She looked up at him, blue eyes serious, and caught his hand before he could step away. "Will I see you again?" The question hung between them, weighted with hope and uncertainty. Harrison knew he should leave, should drift on to the next town, the next job, the next chapter of his rootless life. That was what he did. That was who he was. But looking at Sarah, at the way she held his hand like it was something precious, he found he did not want to be that person anymore. "Yes," he said simply. "If you want to, I want to." Samuel climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins, shooting Harrison a knowing look. "You know where we live. Come by for supper tomorrow. It is the least we can do." Harrison watched the wagon roll away, Sarah looking back over her shoulder until they turned a corner and disappeared from view. Then he stood in the middle of the dusty street, feeling like he had just stepped off a cliff and had not yet hit the ground, exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. He spent the rest of the day finding work, hiring on with a local rancher who needed help repairing fences damaged in a recent storm. The work was hard and hot, but Harrison welcomed it, needed the physical exhaustion to quiet the chaos in his mind. His body still ached from carrying Sarah, every movement reminding him of that desperate walk, but the pain felt almost good, a tangible connection to something that mattered. The next evening found him riding out to the Zimmerman homestead, following Samuel's directions to a small plot of land a mile outside town. The house was barely more than a shack, wooden walls weathered gray, roof patched with mismatched materials. But the small garden beside it showed signs of careful tending, neat rows of vegetables fighting for life in the unforgiving soil. Sarah sat on the porch in a rocking chair, her bandaged leg propped up, and she smiled when she saw him approaching. Harrison's heart did something complicated in his chest, a sensation he was not sure he had ever felt before. "You came," she said. "I said I would. Men say a lot of things they do not mean." Harrison tied his horse to the porch rail and climbed the steps, settling himself on the edge of the porch near her chair. "I try to mean what I say." They talked while Samuel prepared supper inside. Simple conversation about nothing and everything, discovering each other in the way of people who sensed something important building between them. Sarah told him about life in Nebraska, about the farm they had lost when banks foreclosed after bad harvests, about the desperation that drove families west chasing rumors of opportunity. Harrison told her about growing up rough after his parents died, about learning to survive on his own, about the loneliness that came from never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. "Why did you become a cowboy?" she asked. "It was work, and I was good with horses." Seemed like as good a life as any. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I think maybe I was just running. From memories, from pain, from the risk of caring about anything too much. Hard to lose something if you never let yourself have it in the first place." Sarah reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his calloused palm. "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It was," he admitted. "It is. But I did not really understand that until 3 days ago when I saw you by that creek." "What changed?" "Everything." He met her eyes, letting her see the truth of it. "You changed everything." Supper was simple fare, beans and corn bread and coffee so strong it could strip paint, but Harrison had never enjoyed a meal more. Samuel told stories about Sarah as a child, making her blush and protest, painting a picture of a girl who had always been strong-willed and stubborn, who had nursed injured animals and stood up to bullies, and refused to be less than herself, even when the world told her to be quiet and small. "She gets that from her mother," Samuel said, his eyes going distant with memory. "Margaret was the strongest person I ever knew. When she got sick on the trail, she knew she was dying, but she made me promise to keep going, to get Sarah somewhere safe, to not let grief stop us from living." He cleared his throat roughly. "I am trying to keep that promise, but this land is not what I hoped it would be." "Nothing ever is," Harrison said. "But sometimes what we find is better than what we were looking for, even if it does not look like it at first." Samuel studied him across the table, then nodded slowly. "You are welcome here any time, Harrison. I mean that." It became a routine. Harrison worked during the day, taking whatever jobs he could find around Keeler, and spent his evenings at the Zimmerman homestead. He helped Samuel with heavy work Sarah could not do while she recovered, repairing the roof, reinforcing the chicken coop against coyotes, digging a better irrigation channel from the creek to the garden. In return, Sarah mended his clothes, which had been in desperate need of attention, and fed him meals that, while simple, were infinitely better than camp food. But mostly they talked, endless conversations that stretched from sunset to full dark and beyond, getting to know each other with the intensity of people who recognized something rare and precious and did not want to waste time on pretense. Sarah was smarter than she had let on at first, well-read despite limited schooling, curious about everything from politics to science to philosophy. Harrison found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he had kept locked away for years, finding in her an audience that did not judge, only listened and understood. 2 weeks after the snake bite, Sarah was well enough to walk without pain, the swelling gone, only a faint scar remaining as evidence of how close she had come to dying. Harrison arrived one evening to find her in the garden, tending tomato plants that were finally starting to thrive in the summer heat. "Look," she said proudly, showing him small green fruits hanging from the vines. "We might actually get a harvest after all. Your father will be pleased." "My father is already pleased," she said, giving him a significant look. "He likes you, Harrison. He thinks you are good for me. What do you think?" Sarah set down her watering can and turned to face him fully, serious in the fading light. "I think you are the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time, maybe ever, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I do not want you to leave. Because I know cowboys drift. It is what they do, And one day you will hear about work in Nevada or Arizona or Montana, and you will ride out and I will never see you again." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I do not think my heart could take that." Harrison closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. "What if I told you I am tired of drifting? What if I told you I want to stay? You mean that?" "Sarah, I have spent 10 years running from one place to another, never finding anything worth stopping for. And then I found you, bleeding and scared by a creek, and everything made sense for the first time in my life. I do not want to run anymore. I want to build something. Here. With you. If you will have me." She kissed him then, standing on her toes to reach him, her lips soft and warm and tasting faintly of the mint tea she had been drinking. Harrison wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, feeling like he had finally come home after a decade of wandering. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah laughed with pure joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. Yes to all of it." Samuel found them like that, standing in the garden with their arms around each other, and he smiled. "I suppose I should have seen this coming." "Sir," Harrison said, suddenly nervous despite being 26 years old and not usually given to nerves. "I would like your permission to court your daughter properly, and if things go as I hope they will, to marry her eventually." "Eventually?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Son, you carried my daughter 5 miles on your back to save her life. Far as I am concerned, you earned the right to court her the moment you refused to let her die. Marry her tomorrow if you want. You have my blessing." "Tomorrow seems fast," Sarah interjected, though she was grinning. "Let us at least wait a few months, make sure this is real and not just gratitude mixed with fever dreams." But it was real, more real than anything Harrison had experienced. The months that followed were the happiest of his life. He found steady work as a ranch hand for a spread 10 miles outside Keeler, good pay and honest work with a foreman who appreciated his skills with horses. He saved every penny he could, planning for a future that finally felt possible. He and Sarah were inseparable when work allowed, walking along Miller Creek where they had first met, riding out into the desert to watch sunsets paint the mountains in impossible colors, sitting on the porch talking until the stars wheeled overhead. They learned each other's moods and habits, the way couples do when building a foundation meant to last a lifetime. Harrison discovered that Sarah was cheerful in the mornings but thoughtful at night, that she had a fierce temper when roused but forgave easily, that she dreamed of having a real house someday with glass windows and a piano like the one her mother had owned. Sarah learned that Harrison was quieter than he seemed at first, content to listen rather than talk, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught people off guard, that he blamed himself for things beyond his control, and needed gentle reminding that not everything was his responsibility. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes from his years on the trail, from things seen and done that he would not talk about, and she held him through those dark moments without demanding explanations. In November, 6 months after the snake bite, Harrison rode out to the homestead with a ring in his pocket, a simple gold band he had bought from a jeweler in Independence, the nearest real town. His hands shook as he helped Sarah onto his horse, riding out to a spot overlooking the valley where Keeler spread out below them like a collection of toy buildings. "I have been thinking," he said, helping her down, and then suddenly finding himself on one knee without consciously deciding to kneel. "About that piano you want, and the house with glass windows, and the future we have been dancing around but not quite naming." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide. "I love you," Harrison continued, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "I have loved you since that first day when you were dying and still apologized for being trouble. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life trying to deserve you. "Will you marry me, Sarah Zimmerman?" "Yes," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him to his feet to kiss him properly, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, dizzy with happiness and relief, and the beautiful certainty that they had found something worth fighting for. They were married in February 1885, in a small ceremony at the church in Keeler, with half the town attending. Sarah wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen's daughter, altered to fit, simple white cotton that made her look like an angel. Harrison wore new clothes purchased specifically for the occasion, stiff and uncomfortable but worth it to see Sarah's face light up when he waited for her at the altar. Samuel gave her away with tears in his eyes, placing her hand in Harrison's and saying quietly, "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Harrison promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They moved into a small house on the ranch where Harrison worked, part of his compensation, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Sarah made it a home with curtains sewn from feed sacks and furniture built by Harrison in the evenings, simple but sturdy. They were poor by any measure, but rich in the ways that mattered, building a life together one day at a time. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions, navigating disagreements, and making up with the passion of newlyweds. But they worked through challenges together, talking things out instead of letting resentments fester, committed to making their partnership stronger than any individual problem. Harrison proved to be good at ranching, showing a talent for managing both cattle and men that had his boss offering him a foreman position by their first anniversary. The extra pay meant they could start saving seriously, putting away money toward buying their own land someday. Sarah thrived as well, making friends with other ranch wives, learning skills like canning and soap making, helping organize community events that brought people together in an isolated place where entertainment was scarce. She wrote letters to distant relatives, maintaining connections her father had let lapse, slowly building a network of family that had seemed lost when her mother died. In the spring of 1886, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Harrison with equal parts joy and terror. He had seen too many women die in childbirth, too many children lost to fever and accident and simple bad luck. But Sarah approached pregnancy with her characteristic determination, following Dr. Miller's advice, resting when she needed to, continuing to work as much as was safe. "I survived a rattlesnake," she said when Harrison fretted. "I can survive having a baby." Their son was born in January 1887, a healthy boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Henry Samuel Easton, after no one in particular, but because they liked how it sounded, strong and solid like they hoped he would become. Harrison held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect person who depended on him completely. "I do not know how to be a father," he admitted to Sarah, who lay exhausted but glowing in their bed. "You will learn," she said confidently. "The same way you learned everything else, by trying and failing and trying again until you get it right. Besides, you carried me 5 miles with snake venom in my blood. Taking care of one small baby should be easy by comparison." It was not easy, but it was worth every sleepless night and dirty diaper and moment of doubt. Harrison discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor with a colicky infant at 3 in the morning, singing half-remembered cowboy songs in a gravelly voice that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. Samuel doted on his grandson, visiting frequently, helping with repairs and childcare, grateful to have family around him after years of isolation. He taught young Henry to recognize birds and plants, passing on knowledge of the land even before the boy could properly talk. The years flowed past, marked by Henry's milestones and the steady accumulation of savings. Harrison was promoted again, given more responsibility, proving himself capable of running the entire ranch when the owner traveled. He developed a reputation as fair but firm, someone cowboys respected and worked hard for. Sarah became the heart of their small community, organizing quilting bees and harvest celebrations, tending to sick neighbors, mediating disputes with a combination of kindness and common sense that made people listen. She never got her piano, but she sang instead, teaching Henry songs her mother had taught her, passing on that musical legacy in a different form. In 1889, their daughter was born, a tiny red-faced girl they named Stella Margaret Easton, after the stars Sarah loved to watch and the mother she still missed. Stella was easier than Henry had been, a calm baby who rarely fussed, content to observe the world with solemn eyes. With 2 children and money saved, Harrison and Sarah finally bought their own land in 1891, 160 acres bordering Miller Creek, including the spot where they had first met. Harrison built them a house with his own hands, working evenings and weekends for a year, and it had glass windows just like Sarah had dreamed, positioned to catch the morning light. They moved in on their 6th wedding anniversary, Sarah crying happy tears as Harrison carried her over the threshold while the children ran around exploring their new home. It was not grand, just 3 bedrooms and a main room with a kitchen area, but it was theirs free and clear, built on land they owned, a permanence Harrison had never thought possible. They ran cattle on their land, starting small but growing steadily. Harrison used everything he had learned over 15 years as a cowboy, and Sarah managed the business side with a sharp mind for numbers that surprised everyone, except her husband. Together they built something sustainable, a ranch that provided comfortable living and employed several hands during busy seasons. The children grew like weeds in good soil. Henry became a serious boy who loved animals and books equally, gentle despite his size. Stella proved to be fierce and curious, always asking questions, never satisfied with simple answers. Harrison and Sarah raised them with love and discipline, teaching by example more than words, showing them what it looked like when 2 people committed to building a life together through good times and bad. In 1894, Sarah was pregnant again, and their 2nd son was born that winter, named Thomas after the grandfather he would never meet. Thomas was loud where Stella had been quiet, demanding and charming in equal measure, keeping everyone on their toes. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1896, at the age of 62, having lived to see his daughter happy and prosperous, surrounded by grandchildren. They buried him on the hill overlooking their ranch, where he could watch over the family he had fought so hard to preserve. Harrison found Sarah standing by her father's grave a week after the funeral, and he put his arms around her from behind, holding her while she cried. "He was proud of you," Harrison said softly. "He told me once that saving you was the best thing I ever did, but I think he had it backward. You saved me, Sarah. You gave me a reason to stop running, to build instead of drift. Everything good in my life comes from that day by the creek." She turned in his arms, face wet with tears. "We saved each other then, and we keep saving each other every day." The 20th century arrived, bringing changes to the West that old-timers lamented and young people embraced. Automobiles appeared on roads built for horses, though they were rare and unreliable enough that most people stuck with traditional transportation. Electric lights came to larger towns, though Keeler remained gas and oil lamps. The wild frontier was becoming civilized for better and worse, but some things remained constant. Harrison and Sarah's love deepened with each passing year, weathering challenges that would have broken weaker partnerships. Droughts came, and they survived through careful management and sheer stubbornness. Cattle prices dropped, and they adapted, diversifying into horses. Henry fell from a barn roof and broke his arm, and they nursed him through pain and recovery. Stella got into trouble at school for arguing with the teacher about women's suffrage, and they defended her right to speak her mind even while teaching her to choose battles wisely. Through it all, they had each other. Harrison still carried Sarah sometimes, playfully now rather than desperately, but always remembering that first terrible, beautiful walk that had bound them together. Sarah still looked at him with wonder occasionally, as if she could not quite believe her luck, and he understood because he felt the same way. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Harrison took Sarah back to Miller Creek, to the exact spot where he had found her all those years ago. Their children were old enough to watch themselves for an afternoon, and he wanted time alone with his wife, away from responsibility and routine. They sat by the water, much lower than it had been that fateful June day, and Sarah leaned against him, comfortable in the silence of long companionship. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had ridden past that day?" she asked quietly. "If you had decided it was not your problem?" "Never," Harrison said firmly. "From the moment I saw you, there was no choice. Helping you was as natural as breathing." "Fate, you think?" "I do not know about fate, but I know I was supposed to be there that day, and you were supposed to survive, and we were supposed to have this life together. Call it what you want, but it was always meant to be." Sarah kissed him, still sweet after 20 years, still able to make his heart race. "I love you, Harrison Easton. Thank you for carrying me." "I would carry you forever," he said simply. 5 miles or 5,000, it would not matter. You are worth every step." They stayed there until sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, then rode home together to their children, their ranch, their life. That night, lying in bed in the dark, Sarah said, "I am happy. Despite everything we have lost, despite the hardships, I am truly deeply happy." "Are you?" Harrison pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "More than I ever thought possible. You gave me everything, Sarah. Purpose, family, home. You took a drifter with no future and turned him into a man with reasons to live." "You were always that man," she corrected gently. "You just needed someone to see it." The years continued their steady march. Henry grew into a capable young man who took over more of the ranch work, eventually marrying a teacher from town and building his own house on their land. Stella shocked everyone by announcing her intention to become a doctor, inspired by old Dr. Miller, who had encouraged her curiosity about medicine. She left for medical school in San Francisco in 1908, the first woman in their family to attend university. Thomas, the youngest, proved to have his mother's head for business and his father's way with horses, a combination that made him invaluable to the ranch operation. Harrison's hair turned gray and then white, his body showing the accumulated wear of decades of hard work. But he remained strong, still able to put in a full day's labor, still able to sweep Sarah into his arms when the mood struck him. She aged too, lines appearing around her eyes and mouth, her blonde hair fading to silver. But to Harrison, she was as beautiful at 45 as she had been at 20. In 1911, Dr. Miller died, and Stella came home for the funeral, bringing stories of her studies and her plans to return to California and practice medicine in underserved communities. She was fierce and brilliant, everything her parents had hoped she would become, and they were proud beyond measure. That evening, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, 3 generations eating and talking and laughing together. Harrison looked around at the faces he loved, at the home he and Sarah had built, at the legacy they were leaving, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Later, alone with Sarah in their bedroom, he said, "When I was young, I never imagined any of this. Family, home, children who would make something of themselves. I thought I would die alone somewhere on the trail, forgotten before my body was cold. You gave me a different ending." "We wrote it together," Sarah said, taking his hand and kissing his scarred knuckles. "Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow. This is our story, Harrison, yours and mine. And it is a good story." "The best," she agreed. They lived to see the Great War come and go, holding their breath when Henry's oldest son enlisted but breathing again when he returned home safely. They lived to see automobiles become common, roads improve, the modern world encroaching on the old ways. They lived to see women win the right to vote, with Stella sending a triumphant telegram announcing she had cast her first ballot in 1920. They lived to see grandchildren become adults and have children of their own, great-grandchildren who would know Harrison and Sarah only as old people, never guessing at the dramatic beginnings of their love story. In 1925, on a warm June day 41 years after the rattlesnake bite, Harrison and Sarah walked slowly to Miller Creek, leaning on each other as much for companionship as support. They were both 71 now, bodies worn but spirits intact, still deeply in love after 4 decades of marriage. They sat in their old spot, watching water trickle past, and Sarah said, "Do you remember what I was thinking when you found me that day? Tell me." "I was thinking that I did not want to die alone. That was the worst part, worse than the pain or the fear. Just the terrible loneliness of dying with no one to hold my hand." She squeezed his fingers, still strong despite age. "And then you came, and I was not alone anymore. I have never been alone since." "Neither have I," Harrison said. "You chased away every ghost, Sarah. Every lonely night, every empty morning, every moment I thought I was better off on my own. You proved me wrong about everything, and I will never stop being grateful." They sat together until the sun began to set, then helped each other up, laughing at their creaking joints and slower pace. They walked home hand in hand, back to the house Harrison had built, to the family they had created, to the life they had chosen together. That night, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had come for Sunday dinner, Sarah looked across the table at Harrison and smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart by a creek bed decades ago. He smiled back, knowing without words being spoken that they had done well, that their love story had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. They had taken a chance meeting born of desperation and tragedy, and turned it into something beautiful and lasting. Harrison had carried Sarah 5 miles to save her life, but she had carried him much further, into a future he never could have imagined, into happiness he never thought he deserved. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1927, at the age of 73, with Sarah holding his hand as she had done for 42 years. Sarah followed him 6 months later, unable to live long without her other half, the man who had refused to let her die by a creek and had spent the rest of his life making sure she never regretted surviving. They were buried together on the hill next to Samuel, overlooking the ranch they had built, the creek where their story began visible in the distance. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, telling stories about the cowboy who had carried the girl 5 miles, and the love that grew from that desperate walk. The story became legend in the family, passed down through generations, embellished but never losing its essential truth. That love was worth fighting for, that a single moment of courage could change everything, that two people who committed to each other completely could weather any storm. And on quiet summer evenings, when the light hit just right, locals swore you could see two figures walking hand in hand along Miller Creek. The ghost of a cowboy and the woman he had saved, together still in death as they had been in life. Their love story eternal as the desert stars.